Have you ever seen a car with a front end that just makes you go, damn? You know, when you're out driving and you just see something that looks mean coming up behind you in your rearview mirror? In this article, I will rank the top 5 car brands with the best looking front ends. Note that I am ranking the brand, not just a single car, meaning that brands with good looking front ends across their entire lineup will rank higher than brands that have maybe one or two really good looking cars, but a ton of bad looking ones. I will also be focusing on car brands that you'd see every day, though I may make a separate video ranking the more exclusive brands. For example, let's say we have a brand that has two amazing looking performance models with really mean front ends, but then a plethora of economy cars that look awful. This brand would not be ranked high because the majority of the cars in our lineup don't look good. I'm making these rankings off the top of my head without doing any research because I'm sure that by doing research I could find a bunch of examples of ugly cars from any brand in the world. Here I'm going off of what I can remember and know, and not going out of my way to identify ugly cars. Of course, now I must make the obligatory opinion statement before the keyboard warriors come for me. So, these rankings are just my personal opinions and are not a fact. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments, and without further ado, let's get into the rankings. We have Nissan to start our list off. Depending on your opinion of Nissan, this may either be a very strong or very weak start. If you aren't a fan of them, you still have to admit that they've made some good-looking front ends over the years. They've given us the GTR series, which I regard as some of the best-looking Japanese cars of all time. The R32, R33, R34, and R35 all have great-looking front ends, with the R34 and R35 holding a special place in my heart. Of course, we can't forget about the 370Z and the new Z, and while they may look a bit funny from the rear, the front does look quite nice. I've always been a fan of the 370Z, and once I have enough money to buy a daily and a weekend car, the 370Z really seems like a great option. And finally, we have the Silvias, and while I've never really been interested in them, I cannot deny that they do look good. I find the S15 to have a particularly good looking front end. All this being said, Nissan isn't without its faults. They have produced what I think may be one of the worst looking front ends I have ever seen. I'm looking at you, Nissan Juke. I also have never been a fan of the front end of the 350Z or the Fairlady 240Z. I know that the Fairlady is a classic, but I really am not a fan of the stock front end. Modified, of course, it's quite striking. I also have never been a fan of their SUV styling. While it has improved with the newer generations, they still aren't what I'd call attractive. And if we go back a few generations, well, let's just say I struggle to find anything good to say about them. So despite having made some great looking cars, Nissan has also produced a lot of ugly ones, which is why I feel I am forced to place Nissan at the bottom of my top 5. That isn't to say that Nissan is the worst overall. Although it's at the bottom of my list, it still made my list. There are plenty of brands that I'd rank below it that didn't even make the list, and I'll talk about them at the end of the video in my honorable mention section, or rather dishonorable mention section. If you've been reading my articles or following me for a good amount of time, you've likely realized that I'm a Honda fan. And perhaps you would have expected Honda to have landed higher up on this list than number 4, but I won't let my love for them bias me. Honda, not unlike Nissan, has had their fair share of both hits and misses when it comes to front ends. Let's start with the misses this time. If we roll back a few generations on nearly any of their vehicles, we arrive at an ugly front end. If we go to the ninth generation Civic, we arrive at what I think is an ugly front end, though I do like the modified, but in their stock form, I'm just not a fan. The pre 2016 Accords all looked pretty bad to me as well, though they also do look good modified, but again, what car doesn't? If we go back a few generations on their SUVs or Ridgeline, we also have some ugly front ends. The early CRVs, I'm talking mid 2000s generations, do look pretty good, but the generations in between that and present day are pretty rough. If we go one generation back on the Pilot, it essentially becomes an egg, and the previous generation Ridgeline looks like something that is still going through puberty. So, after hearing all of these negatives, you're probably wondering why Honda is even on the list, and that is because they had a glow up. When I look at the current generation vehicles in their lineup, most of them look incredible. They look like they've finished going through puberty. The new generation Civic looks incredible. I think that front end is gorgeous. The new generation CRV, Pilot, and Ridgeline are all similar, but that's not a bad thing. They all look very aggressive. The 2016 plus generations of the Accord also all look pretty good from the front in my book. And if we push time back to the classics, Honda's classics look incredible. The S2000 is a work of art, and so are the early Civics. The 90s NSX is something I consider to be one of the best looking cars of all time from any angle. I put it right up there with the R35. So I feel that Honda is higher than Nissan because they simply have more cars that look good. and though they still appear low on the list because their lineup hasn't always looked this good. Now, Ford being in the number 3 spot above Honda may surprise some people, but hear me out. I'll be the first to say that Ford isn't known for having great looking front ends. In fact, I don't think that they really have any amazing front ends outside of the Ford GT, which isn't a car you'd see every day. That being said, they do have very many decent looking front ends, and they have been looking good for a long time. For example, the F-150s have looked good for nearly my entire lifetime, and the Mustangs have looked good for nearly my parents' entire lifetime. The SUVs have never looked bad to me as well. The Bronco has always looked good in my books. Aside from those three, they have had some other good looking cars as well. The Fusion, the Ford Focus Hatch, and the Taurus don't look half bad, but they haven't had the same longevity as the other models in Ford's lineup. I'd say that the Focus sedan and early gen Taurus are two of perhaps the worst looking front ends produced by Ford than I can think of off the top of my head. So although they don't have the show-stopping front ends that Honda and Nissan do, they do have an incredible amount of decent looking front ends. And as I stated above, some of their models managed to look good throughout their entire history and still do today. This long string of good looking front ends is what places Ford above Nissan and Honda, but it doesn't rise higher than the third spot because none of its front ends are particularly amazing. Many of you were probably wondering when a German brand would appear on this list, and well, your prayers have been answered. Audi takes the number 2 spot on my list. When I sit here and think, without doing research, I am really hard pressed to think of an ugly Audi. The only thing that comes to mind are the earlier Gen A1s, and while they didn't look great, I wouldn't say they were ugly. I'd say the early Gen 4 Taurus was far, far worse than an early Gen A1. Now, aside from the A1, I can't think of any other car in their lineup that could even be ugly. Everything from the RS lineup looks great, same goes for the S series, the A series looks great, and in previous years they weren't awful. The Q lineup in my eyes has always looked decent and is actually getting better each year, I think. Audi has had one hell of a consistent run when it comes to making good looking front ends, though I see how some could argue that all of their front ends look the same, and to an extent I agree. Audi could definitely take more risks and introduce more variability across their front ends, but this is also what gives them that consistency. I feel Audi can make their front ends somewhat more aggressive, but that also comes at a compromise. Audi's current conservative styling is what allows their cars to be bought by so many different people with different interests, whereas more aggressive styling perhaps could push away people looking for daily drivers. And this is the one thing that holds Audi back from taking the number 1 spot. This may beg the question of what brand is in the number 1 spot, because this level of consistency from Audi seems unbeatable. And the brand in the number 1 spot essentially matches the consistency of Audi, but does so while also offering more variability in their lineup and better looking front ends than Audi. And now we've finally made it to the number 1 spot, and the brand with the best looking front ends is BMW. BMWs are incredibly good looking cars, and they have a sort of aggressiveness to them that just makes them look mean. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any ugly BMWs. Even their economy and electric models look good to me. Their entire lineup looks good. It doesn't matter if we're talking about SUVs or sedans, performance cars or economy cars. They all have good looking front ends. The i8 was far ahead of its time and still looks amazing. The new refresh that the i series has received also looks quite good. Of course, the M competition cars are works of art, with very few performance lines existing that could even compete with them in looks. The M Light cars are also stunning. The M340i looks surprisingly menacing despite being an M Light, and the same can be said for nearly any of their sedans. Last but not least, we arrive at the SUVs. They all look quite similar and good from the front, but I must say that I think the X5 is a real showstopper. I would go as far as saying that it is one of the best looking SUVs ever. And that being said, the performance cars definitely do look better than their economy cars, but that doesn't mean the economy cars don't still look good. When I've been out driving, I always notice the silhouettes of BMWs in my rearview mirror look terrifying. The headlights look like eyes just staring into your soul, pushing you to get out of the way. None of the brands on this list can compare to the aggressiveness that a BMW front end has. The brands that can compete don't exist on the list because they aren't cars you'd see every day on the road. For example, a Lamborghini front end would look scarier than a BMW, but you don't see Lamborghinis every day and they're in a different class, so they don't make the list. Now, BMW takes the number 1 spot because they have better looking front ends than every brand on the list, great consistency with good looking front ends great consistency with good looking front ends on every model in their lineup, and produced good looking front ends throughout their entire history. This brings us to the final section, my honorable mentions. I'm sure after reading through my rankings, you all have suggestions for changes to be made, and I'm making this section to explain how I arrived at the rankings and some of the decisions I made, though I doubt it's going to address everyone's concerns. For the number 5 spot, it was a toss up between Dodge and Nissan. They both have made some stunning cars and some not so stunning ones. However, I felt Nissan was doing a bit better than Dodge in the sense that Dodge just had more ugly cars than Nissan did. Hence why Nissan took the number 5 spot and Dodge didn't make the list. Not including Toyota on the list was a tough choice for me. They could land somewhere between Nissan and Honda, but the reason Toyota didn't make the list is because I find while they have some decent looking front ends, that's all they have. None of their front ends are stunning or aggressive, while Honda and Nissan do have some very aggressive looking cars. Toyota also can't match the consistency of Ford or Audi, so they couldn't go there either. Porsche very nearly took the number 1 spot over BMW, but I changed this at the last second. The reason being is I felt Porsche didn't meet my criteria. Specifically, the one where I said that I would be ranking brands that you could see every day. While Porsche and Audi definitely are more common than, say, BMW, it isn't more common than BMW or Audi. Sorry, I misspoke there. I meant to say, while Porsche is more common than Lamborghini, it is not more common than BMW or Audi. And when I think about it, I quite literally see a car from the brands on this list every day, but I only see a Porsche almost every day, not actually every day. So because of that, Porsche doesn't quite meet my criteria, and I chose to exclude it from the list. And that brings us to the end of this video. If you've made it this far, I thank you a ton. I ask that you maybe take a second to subscribe, like the video, check out my blog, www.sharksauto.com, maybe check out my TikTok, my Instagram, and have a great day. I'll see you guys next time.